Welcome to this lab, which pertains to Chapter 5, Switch Security. So in this lab, we aim at demonstrating the port security feature. To do this, we can build a lab from scratch by using, for example, 2 switches and connecting, for example, 1 server and 2 computers, and then we'll move to connect the PCs and the computer to the switch. Okay, so it's better to use the same port numbering because we will be configuring the port security on a per port basis. So to proceed with the link between switches, we can use a crossover cable between the G0-1 ports on both switches. So this switch on the left, I will name it as switch S1, and the one on the right will be named as switch S2, just when we are referring to the switch to have the correct naming. Now for the IP scheme, we can set this simple IP scheme 1.1.1.5/8, 1.1.1.6, and of course we have here the 1.1.100. So we start by configuring the network devices by the IP address. We don't need here to set any default gateway because we are considering that all devices belong to the same VLAN. Okay, so at this level we can test the connectivity between the devices. So we'll consider that all ports belong to the VLAN number 1. All we have to do is to set the trunk. So for example, interface G0/1, switch pod mode trunk, and the same for interface G01 on the other switch. So here we are not using DTP, we are simply using trunk in static mode. We can speed up the events and we can test, for example, from pinging the server 1.1.1.100, everything is fine. Now, how to demonstrate port security? Well, you should remember that port security settings are actually the maximum number of addresses, of MAC addresses on per port. Then, what are these MAC addresses? We can enter the MAC address manually or set it to be dynamically learned through what we call dynamic sticky. And finally, the violation mode. The violation mode, it could be restrict or protect, both of which are better than the shutdown, because the shutdown, you will not receive any logging information once the attack takes place. So these are the port security settings that we should configure on each of the used ports. Now, there is a good practice in port security, which is to shut down all unused ports. For example, you can refer to shutdown on switch S1 the range of all unused ports, for example, interface range F0/1-9, F 12-24 shut down. So in this case we have shut it down all unused ports. So when the hacker comes and plugs a laptop, for example, he won't be able to connect to your shut ports. So in this topology, what should be the port security settings for F010 on PC0? Well, you know as a network security administrator that this port is connected to only one MAC address, so your maximum MAC address should be 1. The same applies for port F011. So let's do it on switch S1, for example. Conf T interface F0/10 switch port security. So we are configuring the port security be first of all enabled, but before this it should be an access port. So switch port mode access, then you set the port security to be enabled, and then you set the port security settings through a question mark, where you set the maximum to be 1, then you set the MAC address not to be statically entered. So you can enter the static address here one by one, but it would be a tedious task. So instead you stick to the memory all the MAC addresses that are dynamically learned. And finally you set the violation mode to one of these 3 modes. In our case, let's use the shutdown. So this is how we set the port security settings on port F010. Let's do a simulation to test our configuration. Of course, if you do show interface F0/10 show run, you will notice that on port F010 you have these settings. The maximum MAC address is absent because it's the default value. Also, you can check the layer 2 settings of the port. In all cases, let's do the simulation. So now, if you try to ping the server, everything is okay because the MAC address of PC0 has been learned. And if you do the show run, you will notice that under port F010, the MAC address of PC0 has been dynamically learned and is now stick to your memory. So at this level, if you copy run start, which is equivalent to saving the configuration to your switch, in this case the MAC address of PC0 will be saved. So if you compare this MAC address here that you obtained under F010, it should be the same MAC address of that of PC0. That's it, it's the same. Now, to do a simulation of a hacker attack, we can simply remove PC0, assume that the administrator or the employee has turned off his computer. Then at night the hacker came to the office, unplugged the cable of PC0 and plugged his laptop on the same port. So we should plug on the same port, which is port F010. In this case, ping 111 you will notice that the ping does not reply, which means that the hacker has been blocked because the MAC address of the laptop does not match the value that has been saved into the running memory. We can do the same actually to try to bypass the maximum MAC address limit. So if you ask yourself, what would be the maximum MAC address on port G01 on switch S2? Well, actually on switch S2, from this side, switch S2 will have 3 MAC addresses sourced from 3 different sources, which are PC0, PC1, and the switch. So in this case, for port F010, the maximum MAC address should be set to, for port G01, the maximum MAC address should be set to 3, because 3 legal addresses should be observed from the side of G01 port. So it's not always 1. It could be something different, especially when we are dealing with trunks. So how to try to simulate a hacker by passing the maximum MAC address at 3 here? If you try to plug 4th or 5th device and try to communicate, then the port G01 will fail down.